we have received assurances from the Iranians that our sailors are safe and that they will be allowed to continue their journey promptly.
The appropriately named presidential press secretary Josh Earnest on CNN back in January after 10 of our Navy sailors were captured by Iran. He told CNN back then Iran was in communication with our nation and that the Iranians would release the sailors promptly. Well, it turns out a new bill has been introduced in the House of Representatives. Its name describes what it is. It's called the No Impunity for Iranian Aggression at Sea Act, and it would force the White House to admit that our government paid $1.7 billion in ransom money to Iran for the release of those sailors. That money was reportedly given to Iran on January 14th, one day after those sailors were freed from their captivity. Now, the White House maintains those payments were not linked to the sailors' release. Oh, really? So what was that money for, huh? Let's go in depth on this now with former intelligence officer Colonel Derek Harvey. He's Skyping in tonight from Tampa. Colonel Harvey, also a former advisor to General David Petraeus. So the White House says it wasn't ransom money. Oh, really? What's your take on this, Derek?
Well, the timing is absolutely suspicious, and given the track record of the administration, it does look like there's a quid pro quo. And this administration, if they wanted to clear the air, they would be more transparent, and they would not have to be responding to pressure from Congress, proposed legislation, to get them to open up and be the most transparent administration ever.
Let's go back to the phones. Calling in from Torrance, California at 1-877-Newsmax. Ralph is on the line. Yes, Ralph, thank you. It's good to have you. Doing fine, sir. You have a point to make about all this.
Yes, I do. I'd like to point out that spying is an ancient occupation. This has been going on since forever. My point I want to make is that let's not do this in an extemporaneous fashion, try to figure out what to do. The reality of it is when a country sends someone into another country, as soon as they enter there, they're going to get tagged right away, just like in the American embassies in the United States, the Russian embassies in the United States. Those people that are embassy workers, they're not economists and such, they're spies, and that's their whole job. They connect with people that are related and the sleeper cells, and they can do a first strike if called upon to do that in strategic targets. My point is that what we need is the United Nations to have an agreement that all countries must sign, and if they don't sign that agreement, then they suffer with the value of their dollar. And that agreement calls for them that if you're going to tag someone and then catch them, you have to catch and release.
Well, it's an interesting point you're bringing up, and it's referencing the case before the break of Bob Levinson, the CIA consultant apparently held in Iran. Quite frankly, we don't know if Bob is still alive. We heard Ralph lay out a very thoughtful plan, Colonel Harvey, but as I think about the United Nations and the anti-American flavor there and the pro-non-aligned nation status there, it would be pretty tough to get the UN to set up a type of standard on diplomacy, would it not, as the type that Ralph just outlined?
We are not going to get any relief or the protection of U.S. interests from the United Nations or trying to rely on third parties. This is clearly the responsibility of the president and the administration to protect our interests and to be supportive of our military who were put in harm's way by the actions of the Iranians. They were not violating anything. They had the right of passage. It was innocent passage. They had a mechanical problem, and Iran violated Geneva Convention and international protocols in the treatment and detention of the American sailors.
And yet, when the event was going on, our Secretary of State, John Kerry, praised Iran for its swift response and using diplomacy to resolve this. Let's listen to the Secretary of State.
It is clear that today this kind of issue was able to be peacefully resolved and efficiently resolved And that is a testament to the critical role that diplomacy plays in keeping our country safe, secure, and strong.
But now we know it was diplomacy in the form of almost $2 billion American dollars. What does this tell us about the next time? Now that we know this has gone on, now that Iran has the nuclear deal, Colonel Harvey, you've been on the battlefield applying the lessons you've learned in terms of intelligence. What do you think the consequence will be since the United States pays a ransom that this administration says is not a ransom?
Well, it will encourage further actions and aggressive activities by the Iranians. This is appeasement on one hand, and the vacuum created by the lack of leadership and standing up for American interests and the interests of our allies in the region will only encourage more Iranian adventurism. And the issue is that the hardliners are gaining power in Iran after the nuclear agreement. Rouhani, the so-called moderate, is not increasing the influence of moderates and reformers. So the whole paradigm under which the administration approached this problem is being proven wrong, and they're trying to obfuscate that and deny it to the American public.
We got about 30 seconds left, Colonel Harvey. It'd be remiss if I didn't get your take on what is transpiring in Fallujah. Iraqi forces continued their fight trying to retake Fallujah today, but they had to stop for fear of killing civilians. The UK says there are over 20,000 children trapped there. What is the scenario here, as you see it, Colonel? About 30 seconds.
Well, we're looking at a potential humanitarian disaster there impacting nearly 50,000 civilians and 20,000 children per the UN. And importantly, it's the type of approach taken by the Iraqi military in conducting operations in urban terrain. They are not precise. They use a sledgehammer and they destroy block after block after block with barrages of artillery and indiscriminate fire. And that will put at risk these civilians. So Prime Minister Abadi was wise to have a pause to try to determine how they could advance their interests a little bit better.
Colonel Derek Harvey, Skyping in tonight from Tampa. Sir, you have our thanks. Before you and I part company tonight, time for the way you see it. Your comments via social media. A lot of you writing in about Glenn Beck's suspension from Sirius XM Radio. You remember the conversation he had with Brad Thor? Let's listen to it because it's very concerning. Brad Thor, a novelist, sets up a hypothetical, but it had to do with harm to Donald Trump. Listen to what was said.
And this is serious. This could bring down incredible heat on me because I'm about to suggest something very bad. It is a hypothetical I am going to ask as a thriller writer. With the feckless, spineless Congress we have, who will stand in the way of Donald Trump overstepping his constitutional authority as president? If Congress won't remove him from office, what patriot will step up and do that?
Well, I would agree with you on that, and I don't think that you actually have the voices. We've been talking about this off air for a while.
Well, Sid heard those comments on last night's program and said this in response. Had the subject of this hypothetical assassination attempt been anyone other than Trump, folks would be calling to have Beck fired. There were plenty of disclaimers, but having said that, I think Beck has gone over the edge. He needs some time off, and it should be more than 2 days. Next, we hear from Dana, who writes in about Bill Kristol and the remaining anti-Trumpers. She says, JD, it's obvious that some in the Republican Party have no respect for American voters and no desire to fix our country's problems. They would rather vote for Hillary because she won't interrupt the flow of their money or perceived power. Those people would rather commit some form of political suicide than accept the people's choice of a nominee. And lastly, we hear from Fran, who has a suggestion for Mr. Trump on who he should add to the ticket. Been a lot of talk about who Donald Trump should add as his vice president. One name that hasn't been brought up and should definitely be considered is Betsy McCoy. Betsy would make a fantastic running mate. Well, thanks for that, Fran. I know Betsy would thank you, but what was the first caller saying tonight about a Trump JD ticket? It boggles the mind. That'll do it for tonight. See you back tomorrow night. Until then, stay brave. Stay free, stay tuned.